This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get on. No choice but to get it on. Welcome to the best hour or so in the universe. It's Reasonable Doubt. I'm Adam Carolla. It's Mark Garrigus over there. Mark is not in studio, though he did put together a pretty good run. He's in New York City. Thoughts of New York City?
New York City. Yeah, and, you know, I was talking off the air with Gary, who said, Drew said, it's like a Mayan ruin. I think maybe Drew needs to come visit downtown L.A., because I'm going to tell you, I've been all over the city the last 2 days here in New York. And compared to downtown L.A., this is paradise. So, I mean, downtown L.A. is, by the way, one of the most frightening places you'll ever want to see. This is not that frightening to me. But I've been all over.
To be fair to Drew, it's like saying, you know, Glendale's bad, but compared to Dresden, 1945, during the fire bombings, during the air campaign, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Like, you're comparing it to the worst city in America at this point.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have yet to see a city or a condition that rivals downtown LA at this point. And mind you, if I had an axe to grind, I'd be saying, hey, you should be out of the city, go up to the Hamptons. I got a hotel there. Go stay in the Hamptons. There's a lot of people on the street. The weather was beautiful midweek here. By the time this airs, I don't know that it'll be that beautiful.
Well, but can I say this?
It isn't like downtown LA.
To be fair to Mayor Garcetti, LA has a lot of people on the street, literally on it, like laying on the street. Yeah. They're not shopping and browsing and buying pastries.
Except one thing you do not see here, maybe I'm in the wrong neighborhood, although I was around the corner, 24th had an encampment there, but you don't see as many people who have just shot up or either opioids or some other drug and then are just passed out on a grate. You just don't see that. Like L.A. at that 7th and Figueroa location is an outdoor insane asylum. And, there's crazies, and Mia's going to go psycho that I say crazies, but while there's people mentally challenged everywhere, this just does. I just think everybody's complaining. I invite you to come to downtown LA and see what Garcetti has led us to. But Adam, you had a good tweet this week, a really good tweet this week.
Which one?
Which I just tried to pile on. You said you could hardly wait for Biden to get elected so he could appoint Garcetti as head of HUD. And I call that the Garcetti principle. He can do less damage there than he can as mayor in L.A. So it's only a matter of time.
Concur. All right, let's talk about some of these hot button cases that are going on involving police brutality and beyond with the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. Jacob Blake, number one, that's the hottest story going on involving the cops and, once again, another unarmed black man shot in the back. What's your take on that? And how does it work?
Yeah, they've already. All of these have the same spin. It's the cops spinning it after the fact. It was reported on Blake that I just saw. He was an armed man. He was armed. Well, only one problem. If you believe they found a knife inside the car, not on his person. So if you're going to say somebody's armed, you're not going to, nobody's making the fine distinction as to whether it's constructive or actual possession. And you didn't need to shoot him seven times in the back.
This is the news part that I find weird. It's like he said he had a knife. They found a knife on the floorboard of the car, but that's not the same as having a knife.
It's also not somebody who, when you say I shot a man who was armed with a knife, what does that conjure up to you? That conjures up somebody with a knife coming at you. As opposed to somebody whose knife, I'm armed. I've got a knife downstairs in a drawer.
Right. Yeah.
I'm in the building.
No, I have a pocket knife in my car too. I don't.
Yeah.
That's not rolling around the floor. I don't know what the floorboard part is, but it's in the. It's in the console in between the seats. But so here, all right. Let me play some devil's advocate here.
Please do.
We tried to subdue this guy once, and we tried to tase him once. And so when you say, well, how about you use some non-lethal form of whatever? Well, what if you tried to subdue him and he shook you off? And what if you tried to tase him and it didn't seem to affect him? What then are we talking about? Like, what is our next move? Like, I completely and utterly get, and a lot of this stuff is going down this way. We had another case where a man was shot in the back, but he was shot in the back fleeing. I mean, it's always a bad look to shoot anyone in the back. I mean, as a kid, that was always the Western. He's a coward. He's yellow. He shot a man in the back. You know, that was a snake back in the day. But the shootings in the backs come after the guy gets the best of the cops physically and from a, taser or pepper spray or whatever non-lethal force. So now when you're saying to the cops, why didn't you use something that was non-lethal? They kind of already did, and it didn't really work. What would you say to that?
Yeah, but what just never ceases to amaze me about these, and Trevor Noah did something that went viral, and I saw it, and I was persuaded by it. It's how is it that this guy who doesn't have a gun or a lethal weapon on his person, because the knife was apparently not on his person, how does he end up getting shot 7 times in the back? And yet the guy who had strapped on, Rittenhouse, had strapped on a rifle, is taken into custody and without incident. And, at a certain point, you have to be trained. And this is what every single one of these wrongful death cop cases, they don't, for some reason, these cops are not trained to de-escalate. And what you were talking about is basically the ladder of force, or they used to have a different name for it, which I won't repeat, but you kind of escalate the use of force. They could have tackled this guy. They could have done a million different things, and they do routinely. There is, and I think rightfully so, there is a perception at this point, wrong or right statistically, there's a perception that force gets escalated out of control if you're black as opposed to white. Now, obviously, I pontificated how many times about all of the cases I have where it's a non-African American, and I think it's I've always said it's a police issue, and inevitably it's somebody with a mental health problem, and you've got a cop who's PTSD. That's on the bell curve. That's generally the way you generalize these things.
Well, my thing with the Trevor Noah tweet or meme or whatever it was is Rittenhouse did not wrestle with the cops. If Rittenhouse had not obeyed, then he'd be shot too, I'm assuming. I'm assuming a guy with a gun that didn't obey would definitely have some bullet holes in him from the cops. So that is a key component that's being left out.
Yeah, and then the counter argument to that is if Rittenhouse was black and he's walking around with the gun that he's walking around with, would they have given him the chance? That's
a hard one to figure out, but I mean, we can all hypothesize. The point is the Mr. Blake. So you wrestle with the cops, or the cops wrestle with you, or whatever it is. I don't know why these cops aren't better at wrestling. These guys just get up and walk away.
Everybody gets up and walks away, and you'd think at a certain point that a cop would say, they keep burning the city down, I'm not going to shoot somebody in the back.
No, I agree.
What is the point of shooting them in the back? I don't understand it. Why shoot somebody in the back?
Well, there's a few things going on, probably psychologically. This person just got the best of you physically. Like they just kicked your ass, or they won the wrestling match, or whatever it is, and you have a gun. Do you know what I mean? Like, just from a pure psychodynamic standpoint, two guys get into a bar fight. The one guy beats the crap out of the other guy, but the other guy's got a gun. At some point, unfortunately, everyone becomes a human being and stops becoming law enforcement personnel or a trained peace officer. You just become a dude who just got his ass kicked. This is kind of the problem. It's that snapping. It's that switching of the brain from sort of trained professional to dude with a gun, adrenaline surging, just got his ass kicked. I think that you've got a point as to what happens, and that's precisely why there's got to be. First of all, you've got to strip. On this soapbox, got to strip qualified immunity. You can't just say that these things can happen. I mean, we did that one. You saw the one, and we're still waiting for a decision out of Utah, where the cop literally drove up, and my client's son was walking away, turns around, has his hands near his waist, and the cop, in a matter of seconds, without any kind of fisticuffs, without anything else, the cop just executes him. And it's you watch it and you say to yourself, this is unreal. Plus, why are there not body cams? I can't believe we're in 2020 and there's no body cams. I agree. There should be. But this is kind of my argument, which is the guy who got shot, which we don't really hear about in the news. Your client was white or Hispanic. Of course, if he was black, Utah would be on fire. And then we would all speculate, well, what if he was a white guy? They wouldn't have done it if he was white. If he was white and he turned around, they wouldn't have done it. But that white guy's dead. So my argument is they do a lot of it. It's all
here it is right here.
It's all wrong, but that's what they do.
I mean, look at this one. I just will never get over this. And mind you, this was dismissed at the trial level, saying the cop had immunity for this. Watch this.
Yeah, he just walks up outside of a 7-Eleven. Guy's just walking away, hands by his side, walking away. He's got his gun out. Tells him to turn around. He turns around with his hands down. He's got his hands. He's walking backwards, and he just shoots him dead. I mean, they just shot him dead. Now,
it's inexplicable to me. My perspective is because I've been doing these cases for more than 25 years. I came into it after maybe doing criminal defense for 15 years, as you know, and it seemed to me that it was kind of a logical progression for the practice, because I would see the cops constantly lying on the stand in the criminal cases. And you say, well, how do you know they were lying on the stand? 9 times out of 10, you can catch them. But it was the same script that they read. Then you go into the civil cases with the shootings, and it's the same thing. And my perspective is that it's the training of these cops, or the lack of the training. And then you combine it with, and I said something to Gary today, the cop speak, the cop language is just, so there was a whole thing, the journalists have picked up on this officer involved shooting, which, all of a sudden now people are talking about that. I remember arguing about that, or cross-examining a police chief many years ago and saying, officer involved shooting, what are you talking about? If this had been a civilian, you would have said murder. I mean, we make it nice by calling it officer involved shooting.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
officer was involved. Right?
It's like
civilian involved. Have you ever heard him say it's a civilian involved shooting?
I love all this stuff. I like when a woman donates her eggs. Yeah, for $30,000, you donated your eggs.
Let's just call it what it is. Gary, do you have that one I sent over? Can you cue that up?
All right, let me ask this, though. All right, I'm going to be the lawyer for the officer in the Jacob Blake shooting. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client rolled on a 911 call. He got a call. It's not like he was driving down the street and saw this guy and shot him. He got a call. He showed up at the residence. He asked the person to X, Y, and Z. Next thing you know, the person resisted arrest. Next thing you know, we're on the ground. We tried non-lethal. We tried taser. We tried non-lethal weapons. He was walking to the car. I don't know if he was on something. It's unclear whether he had a weapon. He had his kids in the car. We'd not proven to physically be able to stop him. He was getting into the car, and my fear was he was going to get in the car and either grab a weapon and turn around on us or get in the car and drive away with the 3 minors in the car doing God knows what kind of potential damage to them. I mean, we would have chased them. They could have gotten into a traffic accident. Like, we're worried about the kids. That's
by the way, you just basically did an extemporaneous version of the script that the cops will tell you. Inevitably, the cop's going to say, I feared for my life. He went for his waistband, or I thought he was armed. I mean, those are the key words that will always get uttered.
I think the better angle is we could not stop him from driving away with these 3 minors in the car, and we feared for their safety. Did you hear what I said? Sorry, we had a little technical issue.
Yeah. I heard it. They may use that as an undercurrent, but the tried and true cop defense is fear for officer safety. I mean, they've got it written in the jury instructions. They've got it in their use of force manuals. All they've got to do, and they must teach this somewhere, is say, I was afraid for my safety or my partner's safety.
Right.
And
no, I get
I
get that. That was definitely a great argument 10 minutes ago. Like that's the tried and true. That's that worked historically. Works perfectly. You say you're afraid for your safety if a guy reaches down to pull up his pants. You say afraid for him. You say afraid for safety if the guy's got a fly swatter and you have a bazooka. You say afraid for your safety. I completely and utterly get that. I'm wondering, in the kind of new world that we're living in, which is 7 or 8 shots in a citizen's back, does that work? It was bulletproof, pardon the pun, 10 years ago. Is it bulletproof now? And that's why I would shift to the kids' safety.
Well, part of what the calculation has always been on these cases is it's incredibly hard to get a conviction on a police officer. I mean, one of the friends of our show, she just wrote a book, a retired judge, Judge Mader. When she was a deputy DA, she tried, I think once, maybe twice, a officer in L.A. Many years ago, decades ago, and he shot a tow truck driver in the back, and she tried to get a conviction and couldn't get it. I mean, and then the judge on the motion, after it was a hung jury, is my memory. I think the case's name or the officer's name was Iverson or something. Judge Mader, back then she was a DA, they dismissed the case. The judge wouldn't even let her retry it again. And that was tried and true because jurors are not prone to convict. And, I blame a lot of citizens. People talk about voting. I say, yeah, voting's great, but how about going on to jury duty? Yeah, there you go. Refuse order to stop is a good job, Gary. Dang.
Gary's having a little technical issues here. Oh, I see. Sorry. Unarmed truck driver. Yeah, refuse order to stop. Yeah.
What year was that?
That's from June 1993.
Hey, Mark, did you say it was Judge Mader?
Yeah, Kathy Mader was the DA at the time. She was now a judge. She retired.
And this guy's driving a tow truck? Because this is full Pixar Larry the Cable Guy. We got a tow Mater situation going on over here. A little shout out to the Pixar kids. But all right.
Yeah.
So
so that's part of the problem is jurors don't want to, they come in. I often say the only people who get a presumption of innocence in the criminal court is if you're a well-liked famous person or you're a cop.
Right.
I mean, one or the other. You get a true presumption of innocence.
So what?
Otherwise,
yeah,
the burden shifts.
What about the George Floyd autopsy toxicology stuff that came out? I'm not even sure why it came out or how it came out or why it didn't come out earlier, but thoughts on that?
I don't know that that'll ever see the inside of a courtroom. Be interesting to see if the judge allows that in. They didn't know at the time, and I'm sure they only released it after the fact, or it was only released after the fact, because there's a suspicion they won't get it in. It won't be admissible evidence. You imagine if the defense of a normal civilian, as I say, normal, somebody who's not cloaked with the law enforcement immunity, had made that argument. I've been there before, and you try and get in the fact that the victim who was dead had some kind of alcohol or drugs in their system. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be ruled inadmissible.
So he had a high level.
If you didn't, yeah.
So he had fentanyl, and it was affecting his lungs. I think the coroner said his lungs weighed. Had to picture that. His lungs weighed 2 or 3 times what normal lungs weigh. So there was some difficulty in the breathing department. But you'd think that would be not brought in at 11 millimeters or grams or nutrigrams.
I think he had 11 nanograms per milliliter, and what it says here is that OD deaths have been certified with levels of 3. So 11 is obviously 4 times, 3-4 times that.
Yeah. So,
and part of the argument that they're going to make, the officers' lawyers are going to make the argument that it wasn't the knee, it was the drugs in the system. And then you're going to get into a causation argument, and they're going to argue to the judge, we want this admitted because with this, you can't exclude what another cause of the death was. And they probably will have a private pathologist who will testify that was the proximate cause.
So it's sort of, so then the question is did you say they leak it in order to get it out there in case it's inadmissible?
Yeah, I mean, nobody leaks like law enforcement leaks. I mean, for years, one of the arguments that we've made against gag orders is, okay, you're going to gag the lawyers in the courtroom. That's great. The problem is it's the most symbiotic relationship in all of the criminal justice system are reporters and the law enforcement, because they're going to be there before, they're going to be there during, they're going to be there after. And the cops, there's nothing you can do. And absent putting a reporter on the stand or in jail, they're not going to reveal where they got the police reports or the information from. So basically, you get law enforcement, once again, you get prosecutorial immunity by law enforcement who leaks everything. Then they always try to clamp down on the defense.
Is a toxicology report leaked, though? I mean, in this case, maybe it was, but in general, is that not just public domain, so to speak? I mean, is that not normally put out there?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It depends jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
That's
Sometimes
what I
they'll
thought.
have to give you discovery.
Gary has
what they call AEO.
Gary has a
Per the article I'm reading, it doesn't reference an official toxicology. It references handwritten notes of a law enforcement interview with the county medical examiner, Dr. Andrew Baker. So I don't think that's necessarily an official.
Oh, okay. So now,
and guess who would have had access to the law enforcement
the
notes?
cops. So now we talk about, been hearing about the Brianna Taylor a lot, and that law enforcement shooting. They had a no-knock warrant, which seems, the thing about a no-knock warrant is like, I understand both sides of the no-knock warrant, because if you think you're dealing with somebody who's got firepower and you knock, then they might get ready for you when you come through the door. On the other hand, it's going to cause situations like we had. So they had a no-knock warrant. She was the former girlfriend of a guy they were looking for in terms of a drug dealer. They thought that she had been receiving packages or drugs or something for him and bringing it to him, or some version of that. There's some story about in the past, they had seen a package delivered to her unit, I guess her apartment unit, that went to him. At least that's the story. So they did the no-knock warrant. They knocked the door open. Her boyfriend, who was armed, I guess, fired at the cops because he just thought somebody was breaking into their unit. That all makes sense. The cops, I think the guy got struck in the leg. That guy returned fire and killed her. I guess the boyfriend is still alive. So how do we parse this one out? Because I feel like this is just sort of, I don't know, whatever. This is incompetent police work. I don't file this under a racially based cop killing because I don't know how race gets grafted into this one. But you tell us, and then you tell us thoughts. How might this play out?
Part of the problem is that if this were a couple of whites protecting their property, they'd be speaking at the Republican National Convention, and they would be lionized, and that's what the perception is in the communities of color. How is it possible that I'm in my house when the door gets battered down and return fire and get killed and nothing happens? Whereas if I'm outside protecting property, there's a basic disconnect on the perception in the communities of color. And I get it because I've said
But
for
how are you going to prosecute? How are you going to prosecute this one?
Well, that's a tough prosecution because, but it does strike me that there is an involuntary manslaughter there, that there is a lesser standard, and that you could, and they would, frankly, if it was a non-law enforcement, there would be a prosecution. They wouldn't be kind of making all of the fine distinctions that prosecutors make when it is law enforcement. It's one of the reasons why I don't think that you can have the same law enforcement agency, meaning a DA's office, for instance, in a county, passing on the shooting that's committed by a law enforcement agency in that same county, because they have to rely, the DA or the prosecutor relies on that same agency day in, day out. So how are they going to now pick and choose? I'm not going to rely on them here for a bad shooting. You should always have some outside agency, neighboring agency doing the investigation.
That makes sense. You know, in terms of if this was in the private sector, so to speak, if this was just you or me going into someone's apartment, then we would obviously be prosecuted. But to me, this is different, obviously, because there's a warrant, and then you have to service the warrant. So the guy who's, you know, if I'm the attorney for the officer that killed Brianna Taylor, I'm saying he was handed his marching orders. He was handed a warrant and told to go execute the warrant. It was a no-knock warrant. He opened the door. Somebody was shooting at him. He was struck, and he returned fire. I'm not sure how this is going to work.
Right. There's like I said, that's why they're struggling with it. The DA is, because the DA is looking at all that and saying to themselves, it's hard enough to get a cop convicted, and they know that. But to some degree, this is the frustration I get, because the reason it's so hard to get a conviction for a cop is because DAs look the other way, prosecutors look the other way when they put on law enforcement witnesses who just lie through their teeth on the stand. And when you do that, this is the bed you make. I mean, I never thought I'd see the day that we have come to the point that we've come to in America. I just never thought I would see the exposure of this. It almost seems surreal that all of the stuff that you rail about if you're in the criminal justice system, all of a sudden it's gone mainstream. It's crazy. I literally never saw I'd see it. And it gives prosecutors, she'll remain nameless. I just had dinner with a longtime prosecutor, and we had a discussion. And the discussion was, who would have ever thought that, back in the 90s, that you would fast forward in what's a relatively short period of time, 3 decades, and you'd see this kind of sea change. I mean, my father used to talk about the pendulum swing, but it's really kind of astonishing to see where we are and to see how something that a very small niche group was talking about 30 years ago has come to pass and now is somewhat accepted. And prosecutors no longer, remember when we were talking about Kamala and why she's kind of difficult to criticize, because she, back in the 90s, in the 2000s, she was part of that top cop, DA mantle, whatever. It wasn't the progressive prosecutors. You couldn't have elected a progressive prosecutor 10 years ago. Give me a break.
So in terms of Keith Ellison, is it Ellison or Ellis?
Who's the AG in
Minnesota?
Minnesota,
and he's going for second degree.
Ellison,
Keith Ellison.
Yeah.
He's going for second degree. We've talked about it before. Is he shooting from outside of his range? I mean, should he move a little closer to the hoop and not go for the 3-pointer, but just go with something that he thinks he can score with? Or
let me give you an example, which is also pertinent this week. I talked to you on ACS about Scott Peterson's death sentence being overturned. Prosecutors make determinations. Call me a cynic, but I knew at the time, and I think that the prosecutors 17 years ago knew at the time that what they were doing in the death qualifying and what they were encouraging an experienced judge to do 17 years ago was wrong. It wasn't the law. But they had the ulterior motive, and the ulterior motive was, in my opinion, that they didn't care about the death penalty as much as they wanted pro-prosecution jurors and generally people who are kind of slavishly devoted to the death penalty are statistically more devoted to the prosecution or biased or skewed. Keith Ellison, I think, and prosecutors generally make a calculation. When you're playing to the crowd, so to speak, and if playing to the crowd means trying a more elevated form of murder in order to grab all four or be able to get a legal theory through or to a jury that you wouldn't be able to at a lesser charge, you're going to do that because you're going to figure, look, if I get it to a jury and I get the right jury, I'm going to get a conviction. I'll be moved on to some other higher office by the time this comes around. And sure enough, that's what happened. In Peterson, they said Birgit Flatiger, her spokesman, who said, well, she's now the DA. I mean, she was not the DA back then, back in 2004. They released something that said, oh, she was just an observer behind the bar. Hey, I was there. She was not just an observer behind the bar. But they're hoping that nobody's around that remembers what happened in real time, and you use it as a stepping stone to get to higher office. That's, I suppose, a cynical and jaded way to look at it, but it certainly comports with my experience.
Would you make this argument in this day and age with some of these cases that are very charged, have a lot of energy, racial energy, sort of societal energy, Black Lives Matter, and so on and so forth? If you were defending some of these officers, would you say, because back in the day, they'd say you couldn't get a fair trial because everyone in this town has heard of the Scott Peterson story. They're all polluted. We got to go to Wyoming, where people hadn't heard of this thing, because this notion of the juror pool is tainted because they're aware of all this information, have been watching the news, blah, blah, blah. Could you make the argument that we can't give this officer a fair trial because these people who are of the jury might be fearful if they put in a note non-guilty, or fearful that the city could burn if this guy is acquitted? We can't put on a fair trial because everyone is aware of this information and the implications of it if you go not guilty.
That's the exact argument we made 17 years ago. And that was actually a winning argument in front of the Stanislaus County judge to transfer the motion to change venue. Be careful what you wish for moment is, Scott went from Stanislaus County to San Mateo, which was a nightmare. I mean, then I saw some of these jurors interviewed this week. One of the jurors said he wished he had that he could have just taken a gun and put a bullet into Scott's brain. And two of the others gave similar type interviews. One of the jurors said something to the effect of, "I feel like part of my life has been taken away." I mean, a lot of times the problem with a change of venue, and the Supreme Court in this decision this week dealt with this, said, well, maybe LA would have been a better spot than San Mateo. Maybe Orange County would have been a better spot. My feeling was, and we argued it at the time, and not so facetiously, I said, this guy does not have a constituency. Cops have a constituency. And in the sense that OJ had a constituency. Scott did not. Unless, and my kind of tongue-in-cheek joke was, I want to go to Orange County because I've got a higher proportion of adulterous golfers there. But what I was saying is, people on a jury always identify with somebody. I mean, it's but for the grace of God go I. And if you are identifying and you have no constituency, basically, the best thing to do is let some time pass between the heat of the moment and when you go to trial. The worst thing you can do is go to trial quickly.
Yeah.
And you saw it this week. The amount of hate. People might say, well, there was still a lot of hate out there towards Scott. You have no idea. I saw what happened this week. Just when the death sentence portion was reversed, there was nothing like the hate that was happening in real time back then.
Yeah, so the question still sort of remains, which is, if you think the city may burn with a non-guilty, then what doesn't that affect the jury?
Yeah, and that's why you make the argument, look, you cannot sacrifice somebody's fair trial rights by letting the jury, if you're not going to move or change the venue, if you make a determination, and, there's people who do studies, we commission people to do studies. If you're going to say it's as bad and somewhere else in another county in the state, when it's a state court prosecution, then the question becomes, how do you remedy it? And they quoted in the Peterson opinion, at least, the trial judge saying, where am I going to send this? I'm going to send it to Mars? No, but what you could have done there, what they did with, what's her name, Casey Anthony, is you sequester the jury. You tell the jury, sorry, you're going to be out. We're going to take you out of the community to decide this because there's no way that we can somehow insulate you from the onslaught. And that was always one of the big complaints about Peterson is they didn't sequester the jury until the deliberations. Well, that doesn't do you any good, because once the deliberations were over, they came out to cheering thongs, over 1,000 people cheering outside. I mean, it's insanity. And that's before they get to the penalty phase.
I'm going to tease this, but if you're selected to the George Floyd jury, you need anonymity, right? Or can you have anonymity? I mean, those people will potentially be in danger in the current climate if they turn in a non-guilty verdict. I believe in this world where everyone's doxing everybody and telling everyone everyone's address and everything. I mean, I literally I had an exchange, a text exchange with Tucker Carlson the other day, and I said, I'm coming out to D.C. to do something, interview Trump, actually. I said, you want to get dinner or something like that? And he said, I moved to Maine. I said, he said, it's too dangerous for me. I had to move. Like, people have to move now, you know? So we're there. So I'll tease it, but can you have a jury where the jury has anonymity, where we don't know what they look like, we don't know their names, we don't know where they come from? I've never thought. I've definitely thought about them being sequestered, but what about us being sequestered from them to find out information about them? All right, Madison Reed, Mr. I'll hit this first. Madison Reed, Mr. Now, Madison Reed does great hair coloring, and they started doing it for women, and then they were like, hey, if this is good for women, then it'll work for men as well. So then they came up with Madison Reed, Mr. It's a natural look. Gets some of the gray out of the hair, out of the beard as well. You can check out the before and after shots on their website. They don't have the shoe polish look. It's a natural look. I use this product. It comes in a little kit. It comes in a little box. You put on the rubber gloves. You put a little dollop of the color in. You get the color. Go on the website. Get the color that matches. You just kind of rub it through your hair. Then you put a little dollop of the activator in there and rub that through and let it sit for 10 minutes. And you get a little more pepper and a little less salt with a very natural look. You rinse it out in 10 minutes, and Bob's your uncle. Madison Reed, Mr. Right, Gary?
Go to MadisonReedMr.com. That's MadisonReedMR.com and use code Corolla for 10% off plus free shipping on your first box. Again, that's code Corolla.
So, Mark, is there precedent for keeping the jury sequestered from us, not from the information?
Yeah, there's big fights that go on over this, and you're on a cutting edge. I forget which of the trials. I want to say it was Roger Stone's, where there was some anonymity and there were issues there. There was another one, and I want to say it was Greg Craig's trial, where both of those were federal, where they were trying to keep this from the public. What you can do is, I think you can seal the questionnaires for a period of time. I think that that's what you could probably do, and not identify who it is. But it's always a thorny area as to try to restrict access to who they are, or to restrict the jurors themselves from speaking. There was many years ago a rule that got overturned in California that for 90 days they couldn't give an interview, jurors couldn't, or a speech or anything else. Now, what you're asking is quite the opposite. How do you keep the press, so to speak, from getting at the jurors, or how do you get other people from getting at the jurors in this social media age? And that's why the judges have such a tough time and struggle with this idea. I know in the last case we did, we struggled with the idea of getting their social media handles. I wanted that on the questionnaire because I wanted to see what they're doing. And then the government was arguing, no, that's too intrusive. So there's always that tension between the Sixth Amendment right to fair trial and the First Amendment right to free speech.
Gary's writing
to the press.
Gary's giving me a note that John Gotti makes sense, right? George Zimmerman, El Chapo. This makes sense that these people could be in harm's way if they put in the wrong verdict. Now, also, yes, I would sort of yes.
That's an argument that is made whenever you have prejudicial publicity that's such that how is somebody, juror number 5, in fact, they've got it quoted in the 100-page opinion in Peterson, said there's a quote of his when he felt threatened. And he says, I don't know if I would be given I can't be a fair juror anymore. I don't know if I would give the right verdict, the verdict that the community expects out of me. And I feel like I've lost my objectivity. That's a scary, scary thing.
Listen, I'm not really kidding when I say this dude, if he was married, was in jeopardy of never getting another blowjob from his wife. I mean, let's be honest. If his wife was, revved up about this thing like so many, middle-aged women, white women, suburbanites were about this would cause a major rift in your relationship. God's honest.
It's, I mean, you say it and people think you're joking. Yeah, I've never seen anything like the hysteria about it. I used to say this is a scary thing because that was in the criminal justice world. I used to kind of compartmentalize it that it was only in criminal justice. But now that kind of polarization is playing out across the culture. I mean, that's what we're seeing across the culture.
Well, I would sort of say in my argument to have the anonymity thing with the jurors like Gotti, which is basically, I don't know that we're going to get an honest opinion out of these people if they think they were going to become targets or pariahs when they left the courthouse. No different than the Gotti logic. I don't know that we're going to get anyone to give their honest opinion about this case if they think there's going to be a hit put on them when they leave the courthouse. So that would kind of be my argument. Would you assume that's the direction they're going to go with these kind of big, sort of mainstream, so to speak, high awareness, high social impact? Would you say that's the direction they're going to attempt to go on these cases?
That's been done, and I give California as an example. For years, many of the cases that we tried, the jurors would not even say their name on the record. You had to refer to them as a number. Mm-hmm. And then the judge would instruct the jurors, don't worry, this doesn't have anything to do with, you're a threat to your safety. We do this in all the cases, blah, blah, blah. But inevitably, every case where I would talk to jurors afterwards, they thought the same thing. They thought that the reason their name wasn't used and that a number was used was because there was some threat to them. That also prejudices the defense. Some judges have tried to go to an extreme of not letting the defense know what the name or true name of the juror is. That's been struck down because how do you do a background check? How do you do any kind of a constitutional effective assistance of counsel in jury selection if you don't even know or aren't able to do a background on somebody who's going to be sitting there? So that's been struck. But, most jurisdictions, jurors' names aren't even put on the record, and they will seal the questionnaires.
Last topic and question, the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. I guess he's a 17-year-old, had long gun, took to the streets, 2 people dead, I guess 1 person wounded. Do you know much about that situation? I've heard first he shot what he perceived to be a looter, but I've heard that once or twice, but I didn't hear much. Then he ran, then he tripped, then they caught up to him, and then someone else got shot who hit him with a skateboard maybe. He shot that person, and then he made his way off into the night. That's all I've heard so far.
And Gary and I were looking because Lynn Wood has been adamant about the fact of getting him a defense. And I look at these kind of choppy videos that are circulating, and it's hard to make heads or tails out of what happened. I will tell you, though, that let me give you some bad facts. The bad fact is that you're 17, you've got a strapped-on weapon, and you're going across state lines to a location where you know that there is civil or social unrest. Bad facts are all of the things that are being posted on your social media accounts or on the internet, things of that nature. Those are bad facts that some prosecutor is going to impute bad motives. And the problem is we don't have clarity yet, or at least what's been on the internet, and Gary was diligently searching today, you can't get any clarity as to what was going on here and and I don't think we've seen or heard what his first statement to the cops was, because he was picked up, not shot by the cops, but picked up and is presumably in custody. But that video of what was he, Gary? A Wisconsin sheriff, the sheriff in that county?
Yeah, you want to review that?
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at this.
It's chief of the Kenosha police, not sheriff. Here we go.
Right.
Oh, hold on one second. I got to share it again with sound, but
I haven't seen this one.
This is the chief of police after all of this was done. Here we go.
Kenosha.
Persons were shot. Everybody involved was out after the curfew. I'm not going to make a great deal of that, but the point is the curfew's in place to protect. Had persons not been out involved in violation of that, perhaps the situation that unfolded would not have happened. So the last night, the 17-year-old individual from Antioch, Illinois, was involved in the use of firearms to resolve whatever conflict was in place. The result of it was 2 people are dead. The persons were.
This guy reminds me of my football coaches from Pop Warner. But look, here's the sad part about me and the difference between me and Mark. When a guy says there's a curfew and there's a reason there's a curfew because shit happens after the curfew, that's something my stepdad would say, and it's hard to argue with that logic. Now, we're not living in that world anymore.
What's the difference between your stepdad and my dad? Even though my dad was a hard-charging DA in L.A. County, as I've said famously, for the very first 13 years, if he had listened to this gentleman give that cop speak press conference, he would have his head would have exploded.
That was his cop speaky. I mean, to be fair to the sheriff, when you announce there's a curfew and it's ignored 100% of the time, it's got to be, first off, you're neutered in a way, you're cuckolded in a way, but you got to feel like you're making these proclamations like, we will not accept anybody out after 8 p.m. once those street lights come in, and then you look out your window and the streets are filled every single time. So this guy probably had some pent-up energy, and he was like, all right, well, see what happens when you ignore the curfew. Anyway.
Is this the same department that ended up shooting the 7 shots in the back, Gary? Do we know?
I guess
I believe the same guy.
I believe so, but let me check.
This guy's going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
And also,
I'm going to give you an over and under. This guy's got a week left on his job. That's the over under.
All right, we'll get back next week and we'll see if he's still around.
Same department,
right?
Same department. All right, I'm doing live shows coming up. Tempe Improv, September 18th and 19th, live podcast, and then stand up as well. And then of course Salt Lake City, God willing, we're flying Air Garrigus, October 2nd and 3rd, coming up at Wise Guys. Mark, do you have plugs?
I do. Capri, Southampton, this weekend. Stop by. Naya is the restaurant. Say hi to Michael, who is running it. Then come down to Palm Springs and stop by Gigi's on Saturday night and get a wonderful spread by Greg Grossman, the chef over there, or San Clemente Casa Tropicana.
And you can go to adamcarolla.com for all the live dates. And my book, I'm Your Emotional Support Animal, available now. And leave a review on Amazon. I shall read it. Until next time, Adam Carolla for Mark Garrigus saying mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.